whenever you read a play, it's important that you begin the play with a pretty good understanding of the plot. So hopefully you did that, and we're getting ready to dive in and discuss the first act of Hamlet. Understand who the characters are. If you need to make a list of who's saying what and who is doing what. And also realize that most playwrights are going to establish some of the most important threads or themes of the play in the initial act. So you should really pay attention to the topics that are discussed and the threads that you see emerging that you believe are important, because more than likely you're going to see those same threads progress throughout the play. So that's sort of how I've set up this discussion. We're going to discuss some of the main threads in the play that appear in the first act that are going to drive the rest of the action. So let's get started. The ghost. Now, the ghost is the driving point of the whole story. Now, if you see that the very first line of the play is "Who's there?" Well, this is Bernardo being a little freaked out, and then Francisco, shows up. It's like, what's going on? But we know from the beginning that they're hearing something, right? So, and they're hearing something that's not each other. So we get from the first line of this play, this "who's there," this supernatural feeling, right? That there is something there that's beyond them. And we learn pretty soon after that it is the ghost. And as the first act unfolds, the ghost is recognized by different characters as former King Hamlet. And then when the ghost appears at the very end of the act, he says to Hamlet, "I am thy father's spirit." So by starting the play in this way, Shakespeare is emphasizing the importance that the ghost is going to play in the development of the plot. And it begins to raise questions almost immediately. One of the most important questions in the play is the ghost a good spirit or an evil spirit? And that was a big issue of the time, as we talked about in that first lecture, that the Elizabethan people believed that spirits were either very operative in the world and either good or evil. And so that's the question they're trying to tease out. Who is there? Who is it? And is it good or is it evil? And the different characters have different things to say. The very first debate that we get here is Horatio. And he's talking about the ghost. This is in Act 1, Scene 2, lines 148 and 149, where he says, "And then it started like a guilty thing upon a fearful summons." So Horatio's initial encounter with this ghost doesn't sound too good, right? It's guilty. There's a fearful summons. But yet later, the next time that Horatio is discussing the ghost, this time with Hamlet, he says that the ghost had a countenance more in sorrow than in anger. So here with Horatio's account, we don't really know. Is the ghost good or evil or both or somewhere in between? So it's a question that the play begins with. And then in probably the most important scene in the play that deals with the ghost, it's Act 1, Scene 5, at the very end of the act. Hamlet, after the ghost enters, answers, "Angels and ministers of grace defend us. Be thou a spirit of help or a goblin damned." So he's asking that question, are you good or are you bad? "Bring with thee airs from heaven or blasts from hell. Be thy intents wicked or charitable. Thou comest in such a questionable shape that I will speak to thee. I'll call thee Hamlet King, Father, Royal Dane. Oh, answer me. Let me not burst in ignorance, but tell why thy canonized bones, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements, why the sepulchre wherein we saw thee quietly in urn had oped its ponderous and marble jaws to cast thee up again." In other words, what may this mean, that thou, dead corse, again in complete steel, revisits thus the glimpses of the moon, making night hideous, and we fools of nature so horridly to shake our disposition with thoughts beyond the reaches of our souls? Say, why is this? Wherefore? What should we do? And so here, Hamlet is asking all those questions. Are you a good spirit? Are you a bad spirit? Why are you here? And what are we supposed to do? And that tends to be a question that Hamlet wrestles with throughout the course of the play. Is the spirit good or bad? And what am I supposed to do? Horatio, Hamlet promises to go with the ghost. Horatio warns, what if it tempt you and draw you into madness? Again, that, okay, it looks like your father, but is that cool or not? And then Act 1, Scene 5, you have this real important exchange with the ghost and Hamlet. And Hamlet says, where are you going to lead? And the ghost says, my hour is almost come, when I to sulphurous and tormenting flames must render up myself. So there's this sense that this ghost is headed for hell, right? Sulphurous and tormenting flames. And then the ghost asks for, Hamlet says, alas, poor ghost, listen to what I'm going to say. Hamlet says, I'm bound to hear. And the ghost says, thou art to revenge. And the ghost says, I am that thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast and fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. And so we get this sense there that the ghost is actually in purgatory, and the whole point was for, in the Catholic thinking of the time, was that the relatives of the spirit in purgatory would pray for the spirit to be released or to give gifts to the church so that the spirit would be released. But the ghost says again, I'm here so that you can revenge his foul and most unnatural murder. And then he describes how his brother Claudius killed him by pouring a sleeping potion in his ear. And at the very end of this speech, the ghost says to Hamlet, remember me. And so in that sense, he's saying, remember what I have told you. Remember why I'm asking you to seek revenge and then do it. And so this will be what Hamlet wrestles with and delays in acting on throughout the course of the play. And there are many reasons why he may delay. One of those reasons could be he doesn't know whether this ghost is good or bad, even though he wants to call it honest at times, even though he recognizes it as its father. There's still that sense of uncertainty. And that's made very clear by Shakespeare in this play, by the character's uncertainty and by the understanding that a soul in purgatory, you would pray for that person, you would give alms for that person, but never would that person ask for you to take revenge for them. So it's complicated. Politics. As much as this is a play about revenge, it's also a play about politics, and there's a political thread and undercurrent that runs throughout this play. King Hamlet, the now ghost, killed King Fortinbras of Norway. We find that out in this act. Young Fortinbras, King Fortinbras's son, wants to recover the lands his father lost to King Hamlet. Claudius discovers Fortinbras's designs and makes a plan to stop him. So it's important to know that this whole political thread is happening in the background of these personal issues, of these family issues. So we've got several different layers. We've got this larger socio-political level or global political level, and then we've got the personal level that's happening simultaneously in the play. So we'll periodically pick up the political threads and see what's changed in relation to what Fortinbras is trying to do. In many ways, Fortinbras is trying to revenge his father just like Hamlet is. But I want you to pay attention to how each man goes about it and who ultimately succeeds. Hamlet's state of mind is certainly a thread we will come back to often. In this particular act, we know that he is grieving, and he is very specific about it in Act 1, Scene 2, lines 76 through 86. Give me a second to get there. Hamlet says, "'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, no, nor the fruitful river in the eye, nor the dejected haviour of the visage, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief that can denote me truly. These indeed seem, for they are actions that a man might play, but I have that within which passes show, these but the trappings and the suits of woe." So I'm not only acting, wearing the clothing and having the demeanor of a grieving person, but I am deeply grieving. Now, Claudius, in the next few lines down from Hamlet's statements to his mom here, tells him that his grief, his focus on his grief, his deep grief, is actually unmanly, and that he should throw to earth this prevailing woe and think of him, Claudius, as of a father. So here we have Hamlet grieving the loss of his father, who's only been dead a couple of months, and he has his uncle, now stepfather, basically telling him to get over it and move on. This is not something that you tell a person who is grieving. And then another indication that Hamlet is grieving is that before the encounter with the ghost, he's telling Horatio, there are often times that I think I see my dad. In my mind's eye, I think I see him. And if any of you guys have ever experienced loss, that's very, very common. You will think that you see your person in a parking lot or crossing the street, or so it's very, very indicative that Hamlet is overwrought with grief of his father, and is trying to figure out what to do with it and about it. He's also very, very angry, and he is very, very angry initially with his mother, and he says very, very harsh things about her. If you'll see Act 1, Scene 2, lines starting at line 129, he goes into just a tirade, for lack of a better word, and this is one of the clips that I posted of Hamlet really, really frustrated and angry with his mom. And, he's basically frustrated that it should come to this. But 2 months dead, nay, not so much, not two. So excellent a king that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother, that he might not beteem the winds of heaven, visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth must I remember. Why, she would hang on him, as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet, within a month. So he's saying, they had this great relationship. Let me not think on it. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere these shoes were old, with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe. All tears, why she, even she, O God, a beast that wants discourse of reason, would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules. Within a month, ere yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left the flushing in her galled eyes, she married. O most wicked speed to post, with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, nor it cannot come to good, but breaks my heart. So he is truly angry with the speed in which she married Claudius. As we talked in the earlier introductory lecture, the question Hamlet isn't asking, and he can't ask because he is so angry, is what choices did she have? And so that's a question we need to continue to ask ourselves as well. And then we know at the end of the act, after the revelation by the ghost that Claudius killed him, we find that Hamlet's anger is also turning toward Claudius. So Act 5, Scene 1, after the ghost tells Hamlet to remember him, these are lines 92. He gets, oh, all you host of heaven, oh, earth, what else, and shall I couple hell? Oh, fie, hold my heart, and you, my sinews, grow not instant old, but bear me stiffly up. Remember thee, ah, thou poor ghost, whiles memory holds a seat in this distracted globe. Remember thee? Yea, from the table of my memory, I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past, that youth and observation copied there, and thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter, yes, by heaven. O most pernicious woman. So again, he's mad at his mom again. O villain, villain, smiling, damned villain. My table's meat it is, I set it down, that one may smile and be a villain. And he's talking about Claudius here. At least I'm sure it may be so in Denmark. So, uncle, there you are. Now to my word. It is adieu, adieu, remember me. and I have sworn it. So here now he's angry with his uncle, and he's taken this vow that he swore revenge from the ghost. So he has got multiple emotions going on. And so we will continue to revisit and add as we can tease more and more out of Hamlet's state of mind. Then we've got three other pretty important characters in the play that are a family. Polonius is basically Claudius's chief of staff. He was Hamlet's before. Laertes, his son, who is Prince Hamlet's closest friend. And then Ophelia, who is, we find out, his lover at this point. And so what you see here is a pretty much in contrast to the grand political issues that the Hamlet is dealing with and the serious familial issues that Hamlet is dealing with. What you have with Polonius, Laertes, and Ophelia are more typical personal familial relationships. And in this first act, you see how close they are. And you see Laertes giving advice to his sister, and then the father, Polonius, giving advice to both of his children. Now, Laertes' advice to Ophelia is very similar to Polonius's advice, and that is, in short, to stay away from Hamlet. That she should not trust him, that he is a prince, he is not his own person, he cannot make romantic decisions, that he might just be using her, and that she needs to guard herself and be very careful. And one of the clips shows Laertes' advice to Ophelia. And Polonius follows it up with much the same information. So just as typical fathers and brothers would advise a daughter and a sister to watch out for that dude, that's what they're doing in this act. And that's important because the relationship between Ophelia and Hamlet becomes very, very complicated and ultimately leads to Ophelia dying. Polonius' advice to Laertes is interesting as well. And Laertes is about to return to school after the funeral of Hamlet and then the marriage of Gertrude and Claudius. And here is Polonius sending his son off with some very sage advice. And so I want to look at those lines and talk about them for a little bit as to what this father is advising his son. The first thing he says in these lines, Act 1, Scene 3, lines 90 to 136, be thou familiar, which just means friendly, but by no means indiscriminate, right? So be friendly to people, but don't be too friendly, right? He says, beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear it that the opposed may beware of thee. So don't get into a fight, but if you do get into a fight, win, okay? Give every man thy ear, but few thy voice. In other words, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use them accordingly. Listen more than you speak. Take each man's censure, which is opinion, so listen to each man's opinion, but reserve thy judgment. Don't spend more than you can afford is basically the next piece of advice. And then neither a borrower nor a lender be. So don't borrow from friends, don't lend from friends, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. So don't do either one. And this above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessings. So here we've got Polonius giving some very practical advice. But the one thing I want to point out to you here is that hopefully what you've noticed about these different pieces of advice is that he's telling Laertes to be moderate in his actions, to try to achieve this, what was known at this time as the golden mean, not to be too extreme, not to be either this or that, but find yourself somewhere in the middle. Don't be too rash, don't be too frugal, but find that nice middle ground. And so I want you to think about this advice, the specific pieces of it, but also in that larger frame, because it's important to think about who are the moderate characters in this play. You don't know that now, but you will know. Who thinks things through, who acts rashly, and ultimately who is standing at the end of the play. So I think it's important to introduce this thread here, just so it'll be something you're thinking about as you continue to read.